the Grey Hat Beard podcast. Hello and welcome to show 46 of Grey Hat Beard, the modern workplace podcast where we talk about all things Microsoft 365. I'm the Grey of Grey Hat Beard. My name's Kevin McDonald. I'm the head of practice for modern workplace at CPS, also an Office Apps and Services MVP.
I am the Hat of Grey Hat Beard. My name is Al Eardley and I'm a technical architect at the Microsoft Technology Centre.
And the Beard of Grey Hat Beard may be joining us any second. He's currently nursing a 2-year-old who's just had a birthday, but he's not feeling very well. So he's hoping to join us shortly and will come and join us as we kick off news. Now, we're just kind of feels like we're getting back into the swing of things post South Coast Summit and all the changes there at Ignite. We had the fun and games and catching up from that. So we're going to talk a bit about the news. We're going to cover some of the areas we didn't maybe go into that much in the last show about Ignite. If you haven't listened to that, go back and listen to the last episode and we talk about all the details there and all the exciting things like Loop and Mesh and how you can still use Access with Power Platform.
Ooh, you had to mention it again, didn't you? Ooh.
Exactly. So do go back and listen to this one, but we're going to cover a few things on there. And then in part 2, which will be out next week, we're going to talk a little bit about DevOps. I should say probably more around Azure DevOps specifically, but as you know with us, we may ramble and go round and round a little bit. And that's also why we're hoping Garry will appear, as he is the true expert in that. But let's kick off with the news. And we mentioned Ignite's come through and there were a few bits on there. And one of the areas we didn't cover that much because Al's been mucking around. Oh, talking of mucking around, there's Garry. Hello.
Hello.
We are recording, so please don't swear. We were just getting into the Ignite news on there that we missed from last week. And one of the areas we didn't cover that much was around the security and compliance stuff. And I think, Garry, you threw into the show notes from this around the Microsoft Defender for cloud apps. And I have to admit, I've been listening to Control Alt Azure, and they were talking about this. And it's actually really interesting. I think we joked in the last show that everything would be renamed as Microsoft Defender, and the cloud apps is what was formerly known as Microsoft Cloud App Security on there. But I think they've brought in some more capabilities. I don't know if you did look into that at all, Garry, not to drop you in it just as you've walked straight in. But,
straight away. I think the renaming everything, you can get confused as to, okay, what is this thing? What does it actually give us? What does it do? And I guess, the reason for the name change is, I guess the reason why we're seeing Defender as a kind of a brand being kind of, being put in more places, and it's the case of unifying a lot more of the security controls into a single package, so that you get that lens across your estate about your applications in Azure, making sure that you've keeping up with your security across your infrastructure, your authentication, all those different elements, to really get I guess, like I say, that unified view.
I think this picture, for those looking at the screen, let's try and zoom in a little bit to make. Oh no, of course, because the pictures don't get larger, just the text. Exactly what you're saying there. It includes everything. So you've got your threat signal clustering, your security analytics and guidance going on with that. The one that jumped out, and I'm going to be honest, I've stolen this entirely from Control Alt Azure and what they were talking about it, and read a bit more about it. But this new app governance capability, the ability to kind of pick up on whether it's your whether it's third-party apps that people in your organization have developed, and kind of detect behaviors that, as it says there, will be risky app behaviors, something that it's doing that it shouldn't do. If your app suddenly starts updating 50,000 records in SharePoint, either you're doing a very bad migration, or it actually is something going wrong and shouldn't be doing that, and it will flag those things up. And you could, from what I understood, you can kind of put controls as to whether it block things, will it kind of send a warning so you can go and find out what the apps are doing. I think the point to it. I'm going to backtrack from that comment about blocked, because a lot of the time, especially if you've turned on these apps, they're used across the organization. They can become very popular. And yes, they may be doing things that are a bit risky or not ideal, but the balance of that risk versus the benefit they're bringing may mean you don't want to turn it off. So really be able to kind of gradually change things and do it in a controlled way rather than just blocking things outright was really interesting.
I think when you look at the app governance, though, you're looking at, what are the elements that you maybe don't have control of. When it's third-party apps, how do those updates that get run in those apps that maybe you don't have confidence in, this gives you a different layer of how those apps are interacting with your environment. And I think, that's always been one of the key things around cloud app security, has been, what is it that people are doing with apps that are outside of our ecosystem, and how can we put a barrier in place to prevent malicious activities from within those apps. And we've seen, with cloud app security as it was, being able to proxy all of those and then put constraints on based on risky devices, other risk messages coming through. And I think bringing it into that Defender brand just integrates it with all of those different elements and makes it really clear, actually, that where we had cloud app security, there was a lot of things that you could do. You could trigger actions to take place based on activities. And this just kind of makes sure that, you're framing it in a way that says, if you do something in an app, we have these controls and we have the tools to monitor, which I think is really helpful, because it was very, all the defenders are kind of, there's a lot of defenders now.
Defenders assemble? Is that too much?
That's pretty much where we're at now, isn't it?
I did tweet. I think it was.
That sounds like a Rudy Ooms blog name.
I did think it was. I think it was Bo Cameron. I tweeted saying, Defenders of the Earth. We got Captain Planet heading up that new division there, coming through. For those of you who love your 80s cartoons.
This screenshot that you've got on, though, Kev, I really like this from the point of conversations that I've had in the past as well. With we're quite savvy with, we know how Azure AD permissions work and all those kind of things. A lot of customers moving into the cloud, and it's a big jump, right, of this consent model, and I think that there is this fear of, what am I signing up to, kind of thing, and you'll have apps that will go and they'll say, we need 10 different permissions, and that might be just overkill as well. And I quite like that it's highlighting, the apps that are maybe overprivileged. They've got too many permissions. Maybe that needs to be looked at. Thinking from myself, as we've got the CLI for Microsoft 365. We're a third party app provider that people have to agree to. They don't have to. They can use their own identity. That's fine. But it's that kind of conversation that we have to look at as solutions, providers, developers, architects need to be looking at. Well, we want to reduce the amount of permissions that we're actually asking people to sign up for. So I think it works in a really good way in that, yes, it might highlight other things, but I think by highlighting it allows you to understand what's going on, and more about the actual concept as well around the permissions. So I think, just seeing that is great. And one thing which it did mention as well about the difference between Microsoft certified apps and there's self-assessed apps. So you can differentiate as well between the ones that you've been able to assess and going, that's fine actually, okay. And then the ones that have gone through so
this is regardless of whether you've developed the app or it's third party. It's about whether you've assessed it or not. That's the I guess internally developed ones will always be self-assessed, but then third party you could either take from Microsoft or take your own. Then
I think that that categorization of them, what Microsoft create and publish is one thing, but I think we all know that having been involved in the development of cloud apps, the questions that are asked in terms of what permissions
When did you develop apps, Al? We know you don't do dev.
I've never coded anything, but the questions that people ask when they're buying a third-party app, where does the data go? What permissions does it need? Those are very valid questions that everybody should be asking every vendor. And this gives you, okay, well, we can see what permissions you've actually got from your app. Do they correlate with what you've requested? But also it gives that legacy insight into those legacy apps, and that's always been one of the challenges. Well, what permissions do legacy apps that have been granted permissions in the early days of our Azure tenancy, what do they have? Yeah. What have developers done? What have they actually put in place, and installed before we locked down all the permissions?
Do we even know? Because it sort of talks in there about restricting access of risky apps to your data. I don't know either with this or previously, because obviously, like with the CLI for Microsoft 365, Gary, obviously you're requesting access to a lot of things with that because it can do an awful lot. But people using the CLI may be using it for a specific purpose and just for SharePoint, just for Planner, etc. Within your when you accept an app, can you accept some permissions and not others for an app? Because I know generally when you see the pop-up screen, you have to kind of accept all of those or not. You can't accept some of them.
It depends on the consent that you're using. So you can have, I'm trying to think of the word now, but Graph API has it where you can have dynamic consent, where you will consent to the permissions that are required to perform that particular action. So you don't have to go up front and say, I need all of the permissions when you're only using an action.
But that's as an app. That's as an app developer, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if you in the CLI say you need all these permissions, can I as an admin grant you some but not others?
Not that I'm aware of, no. But from that point of view, you're then wanting to look at, can I create my own identity and use that with the with the service that you're signing up to, of which with the CLI you can absolutely do that. Therefore, if you're just using it for SharePoint, you can just give it the SharePoint permissions that it needs, or the permissions that you need to for the actions that you want to perform through the CLI. Then it will obviously work. So there is a kind of taking this as a scenario, the reason why we ask for a lot of permissions up front is simply for ease. It's the quickest way to get up and running, and you know that if you run any command, you've already consented, that's fine. We also understand that that's not necessarily going to happen on every environment. Therefore, there is an alternative route to go down.
I'm just wondering if there's a challenge for app developers to kind of think about. It's not just your upfront granting permissions. Someone changes the policies with the Defender for Cloud Apps, trying to get that into my head as a habit. Do you have to kind of be more defensive in terms of when you're requesting things and put that as more often, because you may be granted access, then it gets flagged up on alert saying there's, I can see on the screen it talks about, I know I'm not sharing at the moment, but I can see it on my screen, an app made anonymous graph something or other, and then cuts it off. That maybe they've changed the policy and said no, we're not allowing these things, how that would impact apps, whether it's a kind of all or nothing. But intriguing one to think about.
I guess this gives the insight into what apps would be impacted by those sorts of changes.
Yeah, it's whether you can kind of make that change to the app, whether it blocks it completely, whether you can block some of the functionality. I would have thought if you're blocking some of the access, that's going to be very painful to handle.
Yes.
On there, so hopefully not within that. Seeing as none of us know, it's probably best to move on to the next one. And you're going to move outside of the kind of voice is going now. We are all a little croaky and tired today, so hopefully we'll get some rhythm to this at some point. But the next news that kind of came out wasn't from Ignite, but was from it was the Edu conference, which I'm trying to desperately find what it was called, but there was a Microsoft Reimagine. That was the one. And there were a couple of interesting announcements around that, around SEs. So Windows 11 SE and the Surface Laptop SE. And really, these are the operating system, which is kind of pared down version of Windows 11, designed for schools. I might come back to talking about that, because I think the bigger news, as far as I could see, was the Microsoft Surface Laptop SE, a kind of more affordable PC, $249, which is quite impressive. Certainly looking at that Chromebook level within there, made for students. So having that camera built in, speakers, different elements on there, and designed to be there for people in education. It talks about K8 students, which I'm guessing is secondary school. I don't know if anyone knows the American system.
I think K8 secondary, yeah.
Isn't that? Yeah. And having the learning. And there was even more details. I'm just going to jump over to another article that Mary Jo Foley had, that we'll put in the show notes, talking about this, including the SE, which Microsoft says doesn't stand for anything, but seems to have school or student edition. Does seem to make sense within there. But also they announced not that long ago, I can't remember if we talked about this on the show, the A1 per device license. So for $38, you can get a device that will have Teams, Office, OneNote, Class Notebook, apps like Minecraft Education Edition, Flipgrid, Reading Progress on there, and that's for 6 years, which is quite impressive. And that will give you the offline access. At least I thought it was impressive until I was chatting with Al before the show, and he pointed out that the A1 license is actually free for people at the moment. So they are trying to charge for things that wasn't available. But I guess, sorry, Al.
There's a relative cost here, isn't there? The A1 licenses were free, so for students, but it was only web access. So yeah. I guess the key thing here is, and they call it out quite a lot in the Microsoft article introducing the Surface Laptop SE, how large the proportion is in the US of students who don't have access to the internet and don't have online access outside of school. And I think they've clearly targeted that capability of using OneDrive to say you've got access to these files even when you're at home, so you can carry on working with them and then sync when you get back into school. And I think, that $38 for that sync capability for 6 years, it's not very expensive when you look at it. Obviously,
I don't think Minecraft was included before, and I know Microsoft has a whole load of coding things around the Minecraft, so I think throwing that in as well is a nice piece.
Yeah. So I think there will be a lot of appeal for this from schools. Just because it is an enabler, it is a leveler of the access that students of that age will have to the code, to the capabilities that they need, especially as a result of all of this working remotely and working at home. And I think I think in the second article that you had from Mary Jo Foley, it said it's definitely not as restrictive as the old Win 10 S version.
Winter S, that's it, not SE. Yeah, we were trying to remember that earlier.
Yeah, which is absolutely key. I think there's got to strike a balance between usability, but having it cheap and having it available for those students who need it.
And it includes the Intune license, I think I saw there. So, there's the way for administrators to be able to maintain those, because I'm sure kids wouldn't lose their laptops or leave it on the bus and things like that and need it deactivated or found and bits like that. So it's got all the kind of administrative stuff that would be needed as well. Yeah.
So I think, it's a good move. It'll be interesting to see what the uptake is for that level of device.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like a brick. I can't say I want one, but love where they've got it. The other interesting thing was they were talking basically similar to what they've done with the Surface. They're hoping this will inspire other vendors to create their own hardware. So this isn't a kind of, you can only get these licenses with the Microsoft hardware. There will be other vendors coming up. I'm sure HP and the others will come up with their own versions of it as well, Lenovo, etc.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? It's a pattern that others can use. It sets a benchmark of what capabilities and what performance is needed. And then from there, hopefully other vendors will provide what they need.
Yeah, definitely. Coming back to some of the Ignite announcements, I have been trying to watch some of the sessions, and I think we talked about when we were going through it that there were a lot more in the sessions that kind of came up afterwards, and seeing bits and pieces from that. And Gary, you picked up on one of the ones I was going to talk about with Microsoft Lists and some of the new announcements there as well.
Yeah, a lot of announcements. The one that kind of raised my eyebrow on this one was the board view, which was added. And my instant thought was, oh, we've recreated Planner. But then the more I thought about it, okay, it's based on SharePoint lists still in the background, and you get all that functionality. Yeah, okay, why not? It makes sense. But I did think this may cause some confusion.
But I don't see why this can't replace Planner. Microsoft's already moved Stream within SharePoint and the OneDrive worlds.
It opens up a hell of a lot. I mean, let's think of an example. If you wanted to do this, you'd have to go down the SharePoint framework route. At the moment, you'd have to build a web part and then code all the interactions with the list behind. So having those boards there and the different columns out the box makes total sense. Yeah, and I started to think on this as well. The more I kind of thought, okay, boards and SharePoint, and what it opens up is then, like I said with Stream and how that changed the things that you got by just being in SharePoint. All the compliance and security tooling, external access as well.
Do you not get security and compliance with Planner?
No, I don't believe so.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Different service.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing with this is there's always been that conversation of where the extensibility is of Planner. And that split between sort of going from Planner to a project for the web. You need something in the middle ground. And SharePoint lists, you can obviously optimize them.
What we need is another service. Sorry, carry on.
Absolutely. 2 silver bullets aren't enough to cover all scenarios. You should know that, Kevin. But I think, the conversations that I've always had with clients is it depends on the extensibility. It depends on the automation and what you want to happen in the background. And that's where SharePoint lists have always been, the best solution for that ease of use, especially because it's in SharePoint. It's, you've got the licensing for Flow, Our Automates. You can actually automate that. I think an interesting thing here will be to see how much they do in terms of the integration of some of that with things like Microsoft To Do. Because Planner does have some
big
very
benefit, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and the most beautiful perfume in the world. Planner tasks by Planner and To Do.
Oh, I haven't heard that. I like that one.
You've got to see. We've got to see how whether this will integrate in, because that's also something that a lot of people have asked for, is to see how all of my tasks, not just from Planner and To Do, actually integrate into one location. So I think that would be the next on the wish list there.
I'm getting really distracted. Just this image of your wife opening up a Christmas present.
A bottle of tasks by Planner and To Do. And To Do. You've got to get both.
And To Do. Yeah. Sorry.
I was saying, I think that I was thinking of this from the lens of Planner as well, and a couple of things that jumped out at me are things that I guess a lot of people have been waiting for integrations with Planner, is that ability to have app level permissions, so you can integrate with it easier. That's been a big ask for a while, and I'm not sure where that is, but if you wanted to use boards now and you want that app only permissions, you can go straight in through either SharePoint or the Graph to create your list items. So
It'll also be interesting to see how this plays out. So, talking about that stream analogy of, you get the SharePoint's capabilities if you're using SharePoint to store videos rather than the stream platform. The new connected channels that they announced at Ignite as well, this could be a really powerful tool to say, actually, we've got a shared task list rather than using Planner across those external teams and external users as well as the native team.
I guess it'd be interesting. That maybe this is related to sort of similar things with To Do, but how do you see all my tasks in one place? Well, there's going to be bits with that as well.
Because one of the things with Planner is that the permissions is group level, not channel level. So those connected channels, that could be really interesting. How they then get all of the aggregated view of all your lists across connected channels and tenants, and that might be an engineering challenge, but
always search.
It's always search. Couple of other bits coming there. Modern lookup columns. Yay! Finally, more and more of those classic things disappearing, which is good on there. Create and view lists from the SharePoint app bar. This cropped up and notice was suddenly live. So that those who've seen the kind of app bar that's defined on the home sites on there, where you could get news files, the kind of top navigation. I've suddenly forgot the one that I can't quite see there, and now lists is appearing on that as well. So that's obviously really showing that lists are really becoming a first world system again. I always felt that they kind of were taking a back seat to files at some point, but really picking up again. Now, one of the things about tasks, and I know my to-do list is fairly long, and one of the issues is going to be how many you can fit in there. But the good news is that Project Nucleus, the what they're calling now Microsoft List Fast and Offline, a catchy title, that one, but it does exactly what it says in the tin. And this means that kind of for list, that 5,000 limit goes out the window. You can have massive amounts in there. It will work validly and be synced as well. You're pulling faces slightly, which is making me worried I've said something wrong. Go on now.
Well, it was interesting because they also then said that Microsoft Lists for Android is in private preview. And, I think that's having the apps, and that offline capability, ideally,
right,
where you've got sort of things like To Do, where you can see all of that, you can use all of that. If you had lists and it was offline, again, that might be something over and above what To Do can offer.
That's true. Yeah, there's no offline in. No, intriguing. But yeah, I think it's certainly interesting to see how much is happening with lists and how active that's still being. Be interesting if you have offline, how many you can. It says it'll never be throttled regardless of the number of items. How many can you store offline would be intriguing.
I think what you need to do, Kev, is you need to write a flow that will sync all of your planner tasks, your DevOps tasks into a list. That way you'll quickly see, whether it all cope with, more than 5,000 items.
I did start writing. In fact, I decided to try the CLI as a kind of practice, something to write to this. But unfortunately, other tasks have got ahead of me, so it's on my backlog of things tasks, to try out. Yeah. Tracked in Planner, which is why I keep forgetting about them. But no, I thought it was interesting to see what's that kind of world of lists coming up. And if you throw that in with what we talked about in the last show about Access still being around, come on, surely either this or Dataverse can kill off Access. Surely, please. Moving on to some other things, I'm going to go on to some community news. And South Coast Summit, I had the lovely opportunity to give a session with Sarah Fenner. And she's pulled together a whole load of Microsoft Viva blog posts, and she's got a single page which we'll put in the show notes about that. A great recent one about setting up Viva Insights, Viva Insights Premium with the per user plan. So about, I think it's about 4 weeks ago, you can now, as a non-enterprise, get a kind of individual user. You can see the list price that Sarah's put on the screen of £3 per user per month on there. You do need to have at least 5 users, because there is a 5 minimum before you can get any of the aggregated data to make sure it's not personal. So you will be paying at least £15 per use, £15 per month, just to give it a go. But Sarah's got some great details about setting that up. She's got some other blog posts to go with her Collab Days Lisbon session about Microsoft Viva. It's got a great post about how to get started with Viva topics, first steps using Viva Learning. So she's really gone through setting up a lot of the intro stuff in Viva all in one page. And I think she, much like myself, are seeing a hefty amount of interest in Viva, and a really nice set of posts as getting started ones that are worth a look at, definitely on there. Sticking with the Viva theme, another one of our favorites that came through from WorkLab. It's about the great reshuffle and how Microsoft Viva is helping reimagine the employee experience. So another article well worth reading. I will be honest, you might be like me and thinking, oh God, not another article about the great resignation and all the stuff there. But I thought it's an interesting one. Obviously, they've called it the great reshuffle here. It's something completely different. Honest's on there. But worth having a look about. I know they talked about Josh Bursin's maturity assessment tool, which is interesting, and different articles on there. Just linked with that, another one that I saw that was fascinating, because we're seeing a lot of kind of Microsoft numbers, looking at those kind of thoughts on how people are feeling. But also, this was from the Australian Times, and they got their number from the US Bureau of Labour and Statistics. And actually 3% of people voluntarily left their job in September, which is huge. I mean, that, as far as I can tell, that is in a month. I will put a link to the kind of full numbers, but that really is a lot of churn. I'm kind of finding here in the UK things have slowed down a little bit, whether that's kind of end of year more than anything else. But certainly anecdotally, I'm not sort of seeing those tweets come through of so-and-so's left Microsoft, so-and-so's joined this other one. It seems to have slowed down a bit, but in the US, it looks like it's still at full pelt there.
Yeah, and I think it will be interesting to see anecdotally where people see this taking place. And also remember that, churn, changing a job isn't necessarily changing company as well.
Yeah, that's true.
Finding a different role in a large organization, that suits your new home life balance. That could be what a lot of people are doing. And I think, certainly in the UK, the numbers of vacancies are far outstripping the number of people looking for jobs at the moment. Yeah. So it really is a job seekers market instead. But the types of jobs all over the place. I think there's a lot of people who've held on to jobs whilst there's been uncertainty, and now they're kind of right. Let's move on and let's see what else is out there. I'm seeing that from clients. That's what they're talking about. That's one of the things that they want to try and avoid. How do we invest in staff? How do we stabilize, the ways that we work?
I think it's also, and I've heard this from a few people, where organizations have kind of gone all in, during the pandemic. Let's throw everything out. People have been happy to put that extra effort in. As we're starting to come out of the pandemic, that extra demand is not necessarily dying off quite as much as people are hoping. And I think that's certainly getting people thinking about things as well. So it's, I am sorry, I don't think we're seeing the end of this talk about the great resignation and reshuffle. Important thing with all that is to get feedback from people, engage with people with that employee engagement, which brings me off nicely to the next thing, which is for those of you who have missed User Voice, the new version of User Voice is starting to come out. And so Mike's feedback for Microsoft 365 is now in preview. It's available in there, so it allows people to kind of submit their ideas, thoughts, and have the votes on that, on those top topics. Interestingly, it's built on Dynamics 365 customer service, so Microsoft is drinking their own champagne or eating their own dog food, depending on your opinions of Dynamics. within there, but really nice to see that kind of reuse and making things on there. I was lucky to see this before it kind of came out in the preview, and it looks great. I mean, it's exactly what people want from User Voice. It's got that searchability, so it's got that interaction with what's the word I'm looking for, a kind of search engine, so you can, when you search for things, it will be surfaced in Google and Bing and piece on there. You can subscribe to stuff, send your own feedback. Looking really nice. So very happy to see that back in place.
And it makes sense for it to be part of customer service in terms of all clients need feedback, don't they? So you know, it's the perfect place for it to sit.
Absolutely.
It will be interesting to see how it copes with the scale of some of the tools that we've had. The User Voices, to be fair, has been one of the key tools that I think all of us have used quite extensively in the past, if not to find out what the feeling is out in the real world in terms of what people need, but also to make requests ourselves and get them voted up.
Definitely. I think if I have one grumble, I understand they are not bringing across previous votes, so that will be interesting to see. I know the kind of shared channels was being talked about as something, and that reduction in the time it takes to switch tenancies on Teams, which I think was one of the most voted for things. It hasn't necessarily come across. So I think there will be a lot of let's try and get those big hitting items back to the top of the list going on. But I can understand they're different systems. There's tough decisions you need to make. So good to see it back anyway. Picking on the feedback, I know, Al, this was something we were talking about before the show, but James Cross picked up on something that actually has made me want to go onto Windows 11 for the first time. I've kind of been intrigued about it, but haven't jumped on it. But apparently the clock app in Windows 11 has got a built-in Pomodoro timer with goal tracking, Microsoft To Do, and Spotify integration. And I saw the screenshot and I'm like, that's really nice. Things I like there, that ability to focus, being able to link that with your tasks, link it in with Spotify, so you've got your kind of focus playlist and things on there was really good. And Al, you had a quick look for the show, didn't you? You love it as well, is that right?
I love the idea of it. That's it's always anything that helps us be more productive and listen to good music. It's a great combination, really, isn't it? The problem is that it is a personal Microsoft account. It's not tied into your work account. So for me, that's a kind of a bit of a blocker for it. I would much rather it be able to integrate with Teams and to be integrate with Insights and to actually say, yes, let's see, to do, yes, my personal to do or my work to do. Well, actually, my work to do would be the one that I'd want in there. So I think lovely idea. Might need to play with it and see exactly what it does, but at the moment I'd rather not be using a personal account for something when I'm trying to focus for work. I think it comes down, it's as simple as that.
Yeah, I agree. Although I may go and check out that 90s mix at some point. That looks entertaining.
Yeah, will that help you focus?
No, I'd be too busy jumping around. But
the music for concentration is the one. That is,
yes.
Yeah, I've had that playlist on so many times on Spotify.
Yes.
It's to be honest, this is the first time I've seen this as well, and just kind of looking at it and thinking, yes, this is amazing. And then Al, you really did burst the bubble there spectacularly. I went from excitement to I can just push that aside.
Yeah, I think that's a
strange
thing,
place
isn't it?
for it as well.
I would have liked to have seen it go into Viva Insights, help planning your focus time and to be managing your productivity. I think that's the right place for it to be. If I'm going to book focus time, why can't I book a number of Pomodoros, and do it that way rather than, have a separate app that's got a separate account that's, you've already got a lot of that coming together. Yeah,
absolutely. I was thinking, you saw my look up in there face again. The Spotify integration into Viva Insights would be lovely. And then you could kind of see what the top playlists across the organisation as well. Anyway, moving on so we can get onto there. Just want to give a shout out to the Festive Tech calendar. I was about to say Gregor Suti, but I think there's others involved in it. Is it Isadora Katanich helps as well? I'm trying to remember. But I know Gregor has certainly been the one who's... Oh, and Pixel Robots, who I always forget his real name and saw him at South Coast Summit. So sorry if you're listening. I've suddenly forgotten your name again. Is it Simon, isn't it? Simon Lee. Richard Hooper. I've done it again. Sorry, Richard. Done great work with the Festive Tech calendar. So they've got a set of speakers coming through every day for Advent. I don't think it's entirely confirmed, but there's some great speakers. Bill Ayres talking about Teams. I've seen bits of this session from Pete Gallagher talking about the Azure Percept IoT device on there. And our friend of the show, Pete Rising, has the Great Podcast Marathon. And the good news on this is Grey Hat Beard will be one of those contributing to that. So we're going to try and run as many podcasts and have people wittering on for 6 hours, not just us for 6 hours before either Al, Gary or our listeners do panic on that. But do check it out. It should be a good session. I do need to follow up with Pete and find out exactly the timings for that one. Just seeing that's been allocated to a day. Interesting. So we'll be speaking more about that, and we'll share more information at the time. But do keep an eye out and of the different sessions coming through from there. I think otherwise we'll wrap up on part 1 and try and get on to part 2, which will be out for you listeners next week as we talk about DevOps and the world of Azure DevOps. But thank you very much for listening, and speak to you next week.